there is a potential for federal labs to have a dual mission. We talk about dual use technologies all the time, where they can still fulfill their mission, but they can also be engines of economic activity in their regions.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. What does it take to move a promising invention into the hands of a startup? In this episode, I'm joined by Stephen Auvil, Chief Federal Engagement Officer at TEDCO, Maryland's Technology Development Corporation. Stephen brings deep experience in both academic and federal tech transfer, and he shares how TEDCO is leading innovation to market by providing funding, resources, and connections that early-stage tech and life sciences companies need to thrive. We also talk about TEDCO's mission to support an entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. So whether you're a researcher, investor, or startup founder, Stephen shares valuable insights on connecting ideas to impact. Let's jump in. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
And you've had a fascinating career spanning university tech transfer, entrepreneurship programs, and now TEDCO. So let's start at the beginning. What first drew you to technology commercialization?
So it was in my MBA program, and I remember I was in one of my marketing classes, and we had one of the professors come in, and he said, "Oh, we're going to start this program, this class. We're going to go to the federal lab up in Aberdeen, Maryland, and get technologies and bring them in and have the MBA students work on them and do an opportunity analysis. And then that will be one semester. And the next semester, we're going to work on business plans for those where the opportunity makes sense." So I said, that's a really interesting thing because I have a background in science and I was in my MBA, so I'm interested in business, and it was a way to bring the two together. So that really piqued my interest, and that kind of got me started in taking some of the classes. Mm-hmm. And then sort of serendipity, I was, my wife, before we were married, her father was playing golf with some friends, and he said, "Oh, you should come play with us." And we went out and played. And one of his friends happened to be the director of tech transfer at Johns Hopkins. So we got started, and I really was fascinated with what he does. Again, this idea of combining the science and the business was really intriguing. And I have a natural curiosity, so learning the science and being able to learn more was just fascinating. So after some time, they had an opening in the office. It was the Office of Technology Licensing at Hopkins at the time. This was 1993. And they had an opening for sort of an entry-level person to come in to work on material transfer agreements and non-disclosure agreements. And I came in and just started learning, and that's sort of how I got my started. And then it kind of progressed from there within that office and then moved on to others.
Wow. How has your experience at UMBC and Johns Hopkins shaped your approach to fostering innovation now at TEDCO?
So it was very different. So at Johns Hopkins, it was a big office. We had a lot of technologies, and I was in the medical school, so it was a lot of medical technologies, which is an interest of mine. And we were just kind of cranking out doing licenses. And as I started doing the material transfer agreements and non-disclosure, but eventually moved up to tangible property license and then patent licensing. So I kind of grew up in that office. But as a licensing associate, I had a large docket. All I could do was kind of crank out the license agreements. But I did have the opportunity to work with Howard Califano, who was in the office at the time. And he was very focused on startup companies and spin-out companies. And I was really interested in that. And he had me develop some of these financial models because I was good with spreadsheets at the time. And so he got me involved in some of these things and in these startups. And I was really interested in that. It was more complicated and I was more, again, that curiosity coming and getting into it. So when I left Johns Hopkins, I went to UMBC, which was a smaller organization. I was the director of that office. We didn't have by far the volume. But what intrigued me is they had an incubator and they were working very closely with companies, how to bring the companies, corporate relations, working closely with corporations, bring the companies in to do the sponsored research. And I knew that a lot of the licenses that we did, even at Hopkins, resulted from sponsored research, right? You have an automatic licensee there. So that was very intriguing. And it was an opportunity to kind of grow professionally. Mm-hmm. We worked very closely with their incubator program and trying to get startups out of the university to work with the incubator. We partnered with the incubator on developing some grants. That was the first grant we went after, was an NSF Partnerships for Innovation grant to create a program called the Activate program, which matched mid-career women with technologies from the universities to try to create startups. And that was a great experience, and a learning experience where I got to bring in all these really smart folks to teach the class, and I sat in the back and listened. And the women who were in the class, and I still connect with a lot of them today, were just so impressive and did so many great things. So that the difference between Hopkins and UMBC was really the opportunity to get more involved with the startups, because that was really a passion, and ended up doing less licensing. So to me, it was kind of maybe an off ramp away from traditional tech transfer, but more into the startup side. Mm-hmm. And I was at UMBC for about 10 years, and then an opportunity came up to go to TEDCO. And I thought, oh wow, this will be fun. That'll be even more focused on the startups, and we can talk about more what TEDCO does. But it was also an opportunity to work with multiple universities. So I could go back and work with my friends at Hopkins and University of Maryland and the folks down at College Park and the other universities that we have in our region. So it was a fun opportunity to do more. And again, to take a little bit more of an off ramp away from traditional tech transfer, because at TEDCO, we're providing investments. We're also working to support university tech transfer by providing funding into the universities to do tech validation, tech mm-hmm. assessments. So it was, again, I feel like my career has just been these, side roads, but that's the beauty of tech transfer, is there's so much involved. There's so many different opportunities to go in different directions.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it sort of expanded to be more of this holistic approach. Is that fair to say?
I think it is fair to say, because you're still, the licensing is still a part of it.
Yes.
But now you're involved in entrepreneurial support and new venture creation and investment. So it is broader, and you end up taking a higher level perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm not evaluating the invention disclosures as I used to, but I do get to do some reviews and work with many entrepreneurs. So I still get that curiosity that I'm after. I still get to, feed that by learning about the startups and the technologies in the startups and evaluating proposals and things like that really interest me. And that goes back to I feel like goes back to my roots of what interests me in tech transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, as Chief Federal Engagement Officer, what does your role entail, and how does TEDCO support engagement between Maryland businesses and federal labs?
Yeah. So, and I've been at TEDCO for 14 years and had a number of different roles, overseeing, various parts of university tech transfer and other tech transfer, and then overseeing even some of our funding programs. So my role as Chief Federal Engagement Officer, I have two areas of responsibility. One is really focused on federal lab tech transfer. Mm-hmm. And that's something that TEDCO has always been trying to do. And we're trying to do more and try to figure out how to do that better. And the other, our CEO came to me about 2.5 years ago and said, we want to look to try to broaden TEDCO's impact and diversify our revenue, try to bring more funding into the organization. So let's look at federal funding opportunities, federal grants. So we have been working very hard to get after federal grants. And a lot of that's really, how do we have greater impact within TEDCO without needing to go back to the state for more funding? Mm-hmm. And TEDCO is primarily funded through state grants, through state funding. We get some federal funding. We also get some returns from our investments that help support our programs.
What are some of the biggest challenges Maryland companies face in accessing and commercializing federal lab innovations?
So the biggest challenge I see with federal lab innovations is and I talk about this all the time, is I think one, sort of the conflict of interest rules. There are a lot of rules around allowing the innovator to engage with the startup. And I think that the innovator needs to be engaged with the startup. I was just in a session here at Autumn, and somebody had said, that doing the license is not the tech transfer. It's only part of the tech transfer. You also need to work with the innovators to help get what's in their head, what we used to call know-how. And it's more than that, but transfer that to the folks that are trying to commercialize the technology. So, I think that's a challenge. And I think the other is the culture within the federal labs. They're very, very conservative, and rightfully so. I think for a lot of the labs that we work with, commercializing technology is not their core mission. So putting too much focus or emphasis on that potentially detracts from the mission. I would argue that there is a potential for federal labs to have a dual mission. We talk about dual use technologies all the time, where they can still fulfill their mission, but they can also be engines of economic activity, in their regions, and also for the country and our national security, our economic security, getting some of these innovations that are so impressive and getting them into the commercial sector. But there's a gap there. It takes a lot of work to get something that's designed for a mission application to get it for a commercial application. And that's part of the challenge. Funding is also always a challenge, right? Where do you get the funding? And at TEDCO, we try to address that in the state of Maryland by providing that early stage funding, that high risk funding. As an economic development organization or a tech-based economic development organization, we sort of see our role as being able to take that risk because we don't have limited partners that we have to answer to, or our own. It's sort of state taxpayer money that we're using to make investments to grow the state economy. So we can take those risky bets, those risky investments at the early stage, and try to get those companies to the point where more traditional institutional investors will want to invest. So our role is really to mitigate that risk for the early stage technologies.
And if I could go back to that culture for a moment, anyone who has been in tech transfer for any amount of time, I think, is in a pretty unique position because it's still fairly young. We're in the first 50 years or so since Bayh-Dole, and a lot of the sort of scaffolding has been in place. And so have you seen that culture evolve in the time that you've been working with the federal labs?
I have. So and I think back to early 90s when I started at Hopkins, and there were some faculty there that were very prolific inventors and very engaged with industry, but there was a lot of folks that, tech transfer is bad. We're academicians. We should just be publishing, and commercialization is not beneficial. But over the years, I've seen a huge change at places like Hopkins, and it's taken a couple of decades, right, to change it. But they, and it's not, and I mentioned Hopkins because that's my experience, but I see this in other universities. I've seen small licensing operations at universities grow. They're doing venture development. They're creating investment funds. They're, working with incubators. So they're really growing this effort. So I've seen the attitude change. I've seen younger faculty come in and they see senior faculty that are getting a lot of money into their labs, and they're driving around in a nice car because of commercialization, or they've started a company. The other thing I think with the younger generation coming in is the Mark Zuckerberg effect, right? It's I want to be an entrepreneur. It's sexy. I want to do that, and I think folks like Mark are the exception to the rule rather than the rule, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of risk and it's hard. But also I see a lot of faculty, scientists that come into a field because, they want to cure cancer, right? They get into it, they get their PhD, they go through all this work because they want to cure cancer. Mm-hmm. And then they're working in the lab and they're publishing, and that's as far as it goes, right? And others will build on their research in the traditional academic model, and one day there will be a cure, and that's great. But others, want to see their technology that they developed actually benefit people. And you do that through commercialization, whether you do it yourself or whether you partner with another entrepreneur and stay involved with the company. Then what you're developing in your lab, actually seeing that help patients. And I've talked to faculty and they find a lot of satisfaction in that. And I think that's another factor in why faculty want to do this, why universities want to do this.
That makes total sense. It'd be like being a brick maker and making the brick versus being there when the whole structure is put together.
Exactly.
And TEDCO has been instrumental in supporting tech transfer in Maryland. So can you talk about some of the success stories of companies that have benefited from TEDCO's programs?
So I always get this question, right? What's the Google that TEDCO developed? And we don't have a lot of those examples, because what happens is we fund the companies grow, and then they're often acquired. So they get absorbed into larger companies. But we have a lot of interesting technologies and companies that have spun off. And I'm going to draw a blank here and not have good answers
of
for
course.
you in terms, but we can get examples. But there's a lot of things that we do and that we often, because we're funded by the state, we go in front of the state legislature and present some of our success stories. And we see things like one of our programs is our Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund that funds stem cell research. And it started out, many years ago where it was primarily basic research, but has now evolved in commercialization. And now they actually have manufacturing support to kind of grow these technologies. But when we have folks that come in that, one woman was cured of sickle cell anemia because of a technology that was developed. And I remember, and she's presenting to the legislature, and it's like, oh my God, there's not a dry eye in the house. And it's interesting because she was told never to have kids because of the sickle cell disease. And she ended up having a child, and the child's stem cells were used to cure her sickle cell. So it's like a great story. Another year, a young boy comes in, a cute kid with a bow tie. I don't know how old he was, 7 or 8 years old. But he had skid disease. It's the boy in the bubble disease. And he came in and he was cured with this technology. And this, kid running around with all this enthusiasm, and everybody's excited to see him. And he never could have done that without these kinds of treatments. So these are the things that kind of stick in my mind. But we have other companies, small successes that grow and then get acquired, and that's really that's kind of what we like to talk about.
Absolutely. And you've worked in university tech transfer and now focus on federal labs. So how do the commercialization challenges and opportunities differ between those two ecosystems?
Yeah, the real difference is the involvement of the innovator. I think with universities, I see it as different points in time. I think the universities have been able to progress more and become more entrepreneurial, where the constraints around the federal labs have limited that, right? And it requires a cultural change. You can, and I've talked with folks in the federal labs. They say we have all the statutes in place that we need to do this kind of tech transfer. But we have folks, in our general counsel's office who are very conservative. And I get that, right? It's not mission. Why take the risk? Mm-hmm. But, I think I would like to see the federal labs take more of the risk where the universities can afford to do that. And we're seeing more impact out of universities. One of our programs, our Maryland Innovation Initiative is focused on university tech transfer. And we started about 13, 14 years ago in this program. And one of the reasons we started and look, again, TEDCO's focused on Maryland. So we were looking at Maryland, and we were ranked like 6th in the country in terms of research expenditures, total research expenditures. But when you looked at the number of startups per dollar of research expenditure, we were ranked like 38th. So we were really low. So what could we do to create more startup companies? So we launched this program. The program has, at the time, it had 3 phases, but now has 2 phases. One is really the technology validation phase, or technology assessment phase, we call it. And that we take some money and we put it into the university to validate technologies that have been disclosed to the tech transfer office. And that's done, that phase, that segment has done a lot of interesting things. One, it's created an incentive for faculty to make disclosures. It's got them interested in doing more applied research or validation studies within their labs because we're going to fund it, right? There's an incentive to do it. And then it's also got them interested because part of what they have to do for the technology assessment phase is they have to do a commercialization plan. And we have folks called site miners that we put into the labs that work with the faculty that help them think through the commercialization plan and the commercial opportunities for their technologies. And that has really helped faculty learn about the opportunities and learn about the technologies. The second phase, or what used to be the third phase, but the second part of the MII program is now when a company spins out of the university, we can make an investment into that startup. So again, it creates an incentive for universities to spin companies out versus maybe license it to somebody if there's a potential licensee around. But it also gets faculty an opportunity to work with a startup because that startup is going to get some funding right up front. And the whole program is a competitive program. But after 10 years, I used the autumn data and did my analysis, and we were still 6th or 8th in terms of total research expenditures for our state. But we had moved up to number 8 in terms of startups per research expenditure.
Wow.
So the program has had a significant impact in the state of Maryland. And now what we're trying to do is how do we do something like that with the federal labs? And it's a different beast, and the model would probably be different working with the federal labs. But it's something that we're trying to, as we're trying to solve that puzzle, how to get more impact. That's one of the avenues we're exploring because we have so much success with the universities.
Right. Well, when you figure that out, you'll have to come back and tell us about that as well.
I would be happy to.
What trends are you seeing in federal tech transfer, and how do you think they'll shape the future of public-private partnerships?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that. And I get this question all the time. What are the trends you see in tech transfer? What are the hot technologies? And you see some trends in general science, right? There was a time when a gene therapy was big, right? And there's now regenerative medicine is big and immunotherapies are big in terms of the medical things. But as a tech transfer person, we would still see technologies from all the different disciplines. And while a technology in one of the hot areas might be easier to license, we still have the responsibility to license all of the other different things that come across get put on our docket, right? So, but I don't know that I'm aware of any trends, especially in the federal side, and maybe just because I'm not close enough to it.
Yeah. And, I know you said you're still kind of putting these puzzle pieces together, but are there specific strategies that you've seen to be most effective in bridging the gap between federal R&D and industry needs?
One of the things, and again, this is a best practice from MII, but the idea of this site miner, I think, is a great model. And it's actually one we borrowed from folks in Boston when we set up the MII program. But getting folks that understand industry in the labs with the faculty, not doing work, but having conversations with the innovators, helping them understand the applications of their technology. Because I think the innovators that I've come across, they're brilliant. They know what they do. But they don't necessarily know all the applications of their technology. And if you bring somebody from industry in and say, hey, did you ever think about using it in this capacity? And they wouldn't know because that's not their area of expertise.
Right.
But I think that's a key thing. And we're trying to, we did some work with NIST on that. We're putting, what we called entrepreneurs in residence in the labs, meeting with folks. And that's something that I think I want to explore more with the federal labs. In my own experience working with faculty, and I would have to go out and try to drum up more disclosures. But I remember sitting down with some very prolific, very prominent faculty, and they would talk about what they're doing, and I'd sit and I'd listen, and I'd say, you're working on structures of proteins, and at the time it was a gag protein in AIDS because that was a time that was important. And I said, have you ever thought about the structure is great. You can publish on that. But have you ever thought about, a molecule that could disrupt the folding so it wouldn't form and then you could block the virus? I said, no, I never thought about that, but that would be really easy. I could put a graduate student on that. They could run it through a database. And then he realized that I'm developing these 3D structures, but if I just do this little extra step and develop the compounds that would interfere with the folding of these structures so that they're no longer effective, then I've got something that I can patent and commercialize. And that inventor went on and, was very prolific in inventing and commercialized inventions and got involved with a startup. So a lot of times these brilliant folks, inventors, don't understand the little things that they could do to commercialize and really have an impact in moving what they're doing into the commercial sector actually benefit the patients or the general public.
Yeah. I mean, and I can imagine it would be inherently difficult if you're so into the weeds in a sense. You have to be to get it to that point, and it's probably hard to look up and look around and get that broader view.
Yeah, in research, I think you're trying to solve a problem, and you come up with a solution to that problem, but you don't realize that solution could solve a lot of other problems that you're just not aware of. So getting other people engaged is a way to find other applications for your technology. And this is especially the case in the federal labs where it's very mission driven. You work with the Navy and they're developing a coating that's going to, be used on ships. But that coating might be very useful for applications in airplanes or other kinds of things, or manufacturers that have one little particular problem. So it's really about, the challenge, a lot of challenge with tech transfer is matching the innovation, the solution with the problem it's going to solve. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to change that solution and adapt it a little bit to fit that problem. And that takes work and effort and often funding. And that's a lot of the challenge, I think, with tech transfer.
And given that TEDCO's focus is obviously regional and place-based, and does it often come down to getting people physically into the same room to kind of have those conversations and connect those dots?
I think it's really about relationships.
Okay.
And often relationships, you need that face-to-face or a little bit of face-to-face to build the trust, to build the rapport. Not to say somebody couldn't do it online, and through some type of collaboration. But I think the face-to-face works. Building trust, understanding, it's relationship building. I think in the end, it's even with these entrepreneurs in residence that go in the labs, they have to build trust with the advisors. A tech transfer person, we used to say it takes 3 years for a tech transfer person to kind of get up to speed till they're really prolific. And I think a lot of that is because they have to build the relationships with their faculty in the department. So there's trust that gets built. Mm-hmm. And then understanding between what the innovators' intentions and what their motivations are, and then what the motivations of the tech transfer person is. And it's not necessarily just about money. It's about getting technologies into the hands to benefit the general public. So I think that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a nice reminder of the very human piece of the puzzle that's necessary. You can't just put all of the technical pieces together and the business and the funding. It has to have those human connections as well.
Yeah, and I think many people underestimate the human part, and in this age of AI, right, where AI is going to replace everything that we do. But we are social animals. We thrive on each other. We learn from each other. We, brainstorm and inspire each other. You're not going to get that as much. And I think this in person is a faster way to build these relationships than online. Sometimes you have to do it online because we're far apart, but big advocate of face-to-face.
Absolutely. Are there any upcoming TEDCO initiatives?
We have some specific programs and some funding. So right now we have a program called DefTech, mm-hmm. which is really focused on working with the defense labs and commercializing technologies out of the defense labs, but also connecting companies with the labs for either technologies coming into the lab, to meeting lab missions, but also leveraging the valuable assets in the labs for Maryland companies, because we're obviously about growing Maryland companies. So taking advantage of the equipment, the expertise that are in the federal labs and making those connections. So we have the DefTech program that is doing that. We got another grant from the SBA recently for our FLIP program, our federal lab leveraging innovation to products. Mm-hmm. That one is more focused on life science. We had to narrow into a field. But again, how do we commercialize? How do we get folks into the labs? How do we get technologies out of the labs? So we have a number of these initiatives. And then we work with many of the federal labs in Maryland through partnership intermediary agreements and just the relationships that we've built over the many years. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of what we're doing, but also, looking for other organizations. And TEDCO has 26 years of this expertise of commercializing technologies. And we want to work with the federal labs and figure out how to do that. And how do we get the best technologies, obviously for the benefit of Maryland, but we're also looking for, more broadly if we need to. So we're looking for more opportunities to do that with the labs. And again, trying to find this way, new ways, innovative ways to work with the labs to commercialize the technologies.
Finally, what advice would you give to small businesses and entrepreneurs who are looking to engage with federal labs or take advantage of TEDCO's resources?
Yeah, so the first, again, building the relationships. Come talk to us. We've got a lot of resources. We have folks dedicated to working with the companies to help them navigate the labs. I think for many small businesses, the labs can be intimidating. These big buildings, we got to go through a gate, we get security, and it's intimidating, frankly, for many folks who don't come from that world. TEDCO's role, and for the companies in Maryland, and there are other organizations like TEDCO throughout the country if you're not in Maryland, but find somebody that can help you navigate those labs. Get you introductions to the partnerships office, their tech transfer office. We can help do that. We have those connections. Engaging with faculty, they're not faculty, but engaging with the innovators, the scientists in the labs through the partnerships office. We can help do that. Navigating things like CRADAs, Cooperative Research and Development Agreements, OTAs, and other funding mechanisms. We can help with that. So I think if you're intimidated with the federal labs, my advice to the small companies, if you're intimidated with the federal labs, find somebody that can hold your hand and walk you through it, because there are tremendous resources and expertise that you can take advantage of. And it's your taxpayer dollars. So why not take advantage of it? That's what I would recommend.
Beautiful. Stephen Auvil, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights with us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Happy to be here. And I'll come back once we figure this out.
Please do.
Talk to you again.
Thank you.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in for this conversation and spreading the word about this podcast. Subscribe and listen to more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. If you want to hear more conversations like this, check out our recent episode with Kathleen Otto Rosenblum, who is doing similar work in North Texas, or Catherine Koo, who managed the University Tech Transfer Office that did license Google. Do you know which one it was? Check the show notes or the episode page at federallabs.org for links to more resources and information that came up in our conversation. Thanks, as always, to our producer and digital marketing manager, Carly Dunow, graphics manager, Danny Batchelor, web content and systems manager, Jess Klein, and the FLC staff and community for your support. We'll see you back in 2 weeks on Transfer Files Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.